Welcome back to season 3 of ABCDEI. Today, we're continuing our series of going deeper into some of the topics that we have discussed with the benefit of the expertise of some incredible people at the forefront of the DEI movement. Today, we're going to focus on going beneath the surface. We had the benefit of 3 guests who Susan will introduce in a second, but it is really about, no matter what the marginalization might be, no matter what the points of difference might be, how do you take a step back and rather than treat any group as a monolith or stereotype any group, how can we push ourselves to really say, okay, but your experience may not be the same as my experience, even if we look similar?
For this episode, we've curated a few conversations that we've had. The first is Mohit Rajhans, an early media personality on the Toronto morning television scene. We also spoke with Ali Kazmi, star of the Oscar-nominated film Funny Boy, who talked to us about his experiences. And finally, Stacey Lee Kong, creator of one of our favorite newsletters and one of the best in the country, we'd argue, Friday Things. And they all dug into the concept of superficiality, various levels of how this is being built into the facade as opposed to the foundations. So take a listen. Welcome to ABCDEI, a podcast that explores topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion through stories of distinct and powerful lived experiences.
If you are tired of the preaching, shaming, and theory about why inclusion matters and just want to create change already, then you're in the right place.
Join us as we unlearn bias one alphabet at a time. My name is Susan Diaz.
And I'm Rohini Mukherjee.
Today, we're actually going to do the first episode with a guest. And, as first guests go, this one's a heavy hitter, right, Rohini?
Yeah, absolutely. It's always amazing when you can combine, what you do and what you're passionate about with somebody who can really speak to the topic, but also be a really close friend. And I consider myself very lucky to call Ali Kazmi, multi-hyphenate actor, director, star in a number of films and TV shows, most recently Funny Boy, Canada's entry to the Oscars. No big deal. And Ali Kazmi, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me, guys.
And we have lots that we want to chat with you about, Ali. But we started talking about Funny Boy, so let's go into that a little bit. Talk to me a little bit about the film, because I know part of the backlash or sentiment around the film has been the casting and perhaps the gap in representation, which I understand there are some real challenges around the subject matter. And what that means in terms of identity. So talk to us a little bit about that.
So Funny Boy for me is like an epic journey that I got to be a part of. And I'm really grateful to Deepa and her husband, David, who was the producer of the film, for having me on board. We filmed it in Sri Lanka for 2 months. It was really, really beautiful. The people were so welcoming, and it was really one of the experiences I will never, ever forget as long as I live. We got to work with this amazing cast and crew from there as well. And, so it was a Canadian, Indian, Sri Lankan co-production. And it had one of the Pakistani Canadian in the lead. So for me, it was like something, how we all saw it as a collective. Very seldom on a film is everybody, from every single person on the crew and the cast, and to every single producer and everybody on board, that kind of cohesiveness was there, a feeling that we're doing something that means something, that is lovely and important, and a beautiful story to be told on so many levels. Because not only does it have, we seldom have representation for the LGBTQ community in our South Asian world. We don't have that in subcontinent much, and very few brave people speak up about it. And this story by Shyam Salbadurai has existed for almost 25 years now. It's semi-autobiographical. It's almost like his journey, actually, and how him and his family came to Canada as refugees, and how when he was young and when he was gay, how at that time in the 70s in Sri Lanka, it was like, what does that even mean? Like, what do you mean you're gay? Like, you must be a funny boy. Like that's how it came about. That's how the title is because people back then were like, oh, Chalva, and I play his father, Chalva Ratnam. It's like, oh, Chalva, you have a funny one here. He's a funny boy. That's what it is. Like, it was nobody had an idea of what to do, how to unpack this idea of someone being different, or having a different sexual preference. For me, being from Pakistan and now living in Canada, I think everybody in the subcontinent, and this is again how we were seeing it as a collective, was that for us, we see it as a South Asian story and we want to bring it to the forefront. And the fact that we have that power at this point to actually talk about these issues and bring it to the forefront, and then to have it being Canada's selection for the Oscars was just a cherry on top, in the sense that, we're taking this story to the next level. Now the world can actually see, these lovely stories and these journeys of these people. And there's so many of these stories like this, we know of so many stories like this,
No, there's a deep hangover that remains from these things, right? You carry something through generations that perhaps you have no personal investment in or even fully understand. And to a large extent, potentially, those are the cliches that come through in the pop culture, in the narratives around pop culture. I know that from a workplace perspective, we see this all the time, where the point of discussion around, let's call it difference, anyone different, whether it's a visible minority kind of difference or alternative, the point of discussion often goes back to that difference. There's something interesting. So either, like, for example, we talk about accents a lot, and there's always some comment, whether the comment is that you have an accent, where is it from, or you don't have an accent, and what happened along the way that you don't.
Yeah.
So talk to us about that a little bit.
So before I even go there, I want to. There's so much to unwrap with the funny boy thing, because it ended up being it saddened me quite a bit at the end of the day, because Deepa addressed it and Shah himself addressed it very beautifully, in the sense that, look, we did the whole casting process, and Deepa's like, I wanted, all original Tamil people to play the Tamil family, but we auditioned from all over Canada. We auditioned from India. We auditioned from Sri Lanka itself. But a lot of people, when they were excited at first, but when they heard the story and they heard that it's going to be about a gay kid, and his journey and his sort of, realizing his sexuality and moving forth, and then the family, how they get caught into it in the Civil War, they were like, we don't want to be part of this. It's too political and it's too, it's a homosexual story. We don't want to be part of it. As I was telling you guys earlier, that, my own country, they were very happy the fact that I'm a Pakistani guy and a Pakistani Canadian that's representing, the only Pakistani that happens to be in the film as an actor, and it's going to the Oscars. They wanted to write stories about it in Pakistan, and they wanted to print stuff about it. And all of a sudden, when they found it's the homosexual story, they were like,
right.
Oh, no, we can't air this here, Ali Bhai. I'm so sorry. Or like, we'll interview you and stuff, but let's not talk about that aspect. I was like, but that's a beautiful aspect of the film, that how the journey of the family happens and how this kid discovers himself. Like, without that, there's no story, And so it saddened me at the end of the day to see that the people that are the Tamil community should, we had a lot of support as well, to be honest. But the fact that there was this kind of hatred and there was this kind of cancelling of the film in many ways from a lot of the Tamils in Sri Lanka and around the world, that was sad, because that's not what this was about, and that's not what we wanted it to be about. I'm sad that it happened that way, and I know and appreciate that sentiment, but the hatred was unnecessary, because they went through the process, but you couldn't have it any other way.
I watched the movie. I loved that while a lot of the themes were specific to that time and that boy's journey and that family, so many of those themes are just related to things that all of us can identify with, right? Like whether or not, you're born in a certain place, we all have journeys with an identity. We all have tough conversations we sometimes have to have with family, with ourselves. And then, take what's happening in the outside world and then, coming to terms with it. But I think, one of the things that Susan, you and I were chatting about is how do we now get these marginalized identities to be more mainstream so we don't have caricature, characters.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing. I think that in this case, this was a good example in the sense that the people from the community have to engage. I think all the groups that feel that, what, how's our voice going to make a difference? It will make a difference, but do it with love and do it being smart and articulate and not with hate and not with negativity. That's not the way forward.
I know that as, proud Torontonians here, the three of us, the show Kim's Convenience was something that we all sort of, if not watched, heard and loved. And their recent cancelling was something that we've talked about a little bit. And without actually going into some of the detail around the why and the the politics of it or the drama of it, to me that was unfortunate, and I found that to be unfortunate because I thought it was a really good storytelling. It was there was enough in there that you can laugh at because you recognize why some cliches are cliches. There's enough in there which is like, whoa, I had no idea about that, but I fully get that experience now. There was enough sort of Canadian balanced with all of it, with that the kid and parent story. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts around that development.
And I think it ended up being an amazing show for Canada. It's one of the first of its kind in that sense, right? And showing an identity for these people, And I think a lot of Asians love that idea, whether they were Korean, Chinese, whether they're like, oh, this is a piece of, we all can relate to this, And I think it was a beautiful show. And I think what's sad about it again is that, and I think that a lot of the actors also made that point, is that it's sad that because I think they didn't realize that they had to keep, as minorities, we had to keep working, just like I said, just like women have had to do in all these years. We had to work doubly hard to get the same pay or the same level or the same workload as men, whereas you're working doubly hard to even get to that position, which you shouldn't have to be. If you're qualified, you're skilled, boom, that's done, The same way, I feel minorities, like a lot of the actors and a lot of the people involved with the show, I feel they didn't speak up enough or weren't constantly sort of making that plea or making that idea that, hey, look, we are putting this idea out there. Let's go forward. Let's go forward. Let's go forward. And this kind of canceling that happened to the show, it should not have happened. I think it should have, if people, that's what I mean, that there's that power. I know you have to work doubly hard, but I think right now, as minorities and as diversity in the arts, we have to push harder to make it to a certain place. And if we stop pushing, things like this will happen. That shows like that everybody enjoyed, and it's a shocker to me why it got cancelled. I know there's a lot of reasons that go behind the show getting cancelled, but in this sense, I think if the minorities had spoken up more, I think, or made a strong case for it throughout, which it's not people's fault that you kind of are like, okay, now the ship is sailing. I shouldn't have to keep rowing, but you have to keep rowing.
Yeah, this is one of the more recent ones, right? But there's endless numbers in just even before that. Think Hassan Minhaj or any one of those things where I'm like, I'm confused about why some of that other programming is still on and this like stellar piece of entertainment isn't.
Exactly, right? Like you think about that and it's like, it's a show that was funny, that was cultural, that was Canadian at the same time. And it went from CBC and went on to Netflix as well, which means like the Schitt's Creek and like, many other shows, that means you made it, it was strange to me. And I think that's one of the reasons that we have to keep on trucking. We got to keep on rowing. It's going to be tough. I think the next few years are going to be tough. The idea of diversity is put out there. but less is actually done about it. Like the people that actually make the decisions, I think they need to go through like real sort of seminars and brainwashing themselves to kind of get to a point where they can actually not be racist, and they can genuinely and openly accept the fact that, yes, BIPOC is not just a term. Use it wisely and not just have people and be like, oh, we're very diverse. Oh, yeah, totally. We're totally BIPOC. Like, yes, you're saying that, but you still don't understand what it truly is, just because you put it like a couple of people in some nominations, or you put a couple of people, sprinkled in a show, that's not truly being BIPOC. You're not really seeing the people for what it is. The latest thing that it's a very weird thing. Okay, I swear I'm not being egotistical. It's true. Okay, it's that 4 out of the 6 auditions I did in the last 2 months. I think now that now I think us brownies and us South Asian people have kind of made it to a point where we've gone from not being the token friend, or not being just the geeky person, and not being just the tech person, or not being the the sort of friend in the corner that's just there for color. The roles are getting better and bigger and more interesting and more fleshed out. Thanks to people like Mindy Kaling, Aziz Ansari, Kumail Nanjiani, and Riz, who it's so amazing that he's actually nominated for the Oscars. Like, that's for trailblazers like that, Hassan Minhaj, that are actually paving the way for South Asian people. But now we're kind of stuck. We are now stuck at a point, like I said, that all the people in the positions of power need to get brainwashed and get this out of their heads now and actually cast and think out of the box. Is that I lost out to 4 out of the 6 auditions because the people were like, oh, it was great. I made it to the finals and I made it to the callbacks and did the works. But it was like, you were too handsome for the role. And for a minute, I was like, oh, pretty cool. But it's not actually, because it's like, what does that even mean? Like, it's like, okay, it comes back to that same old thing that because we haven't put it out there, we've been afraid to sort of assert ourselves like we need to. It's been in part of the thing that, oh yeah, of course, yes, white people can be all sorts of things, and now that Black people have finally, African Americans have made it through with the Black Lives Matter and their movement and all that kind of stuff. Finally, they're like, oh yeah, yes, we acknowledge you as being, many things. We as South Asian people are still not considered as many things. We can't be, if you are playing a certain role, even if it doesn't require you to be, look a certain way, or be overweight, or be strange looking, or a character looking kind of person. If your performance is good, it's okay. If I was doing the same thing for a white role, I would have it. I would do it. You don't think that, oh, you're too good looking for a white person. You would say that to Brad Pitt, that, oh, you can't be in 12 Monkeys because you're too good looking. He did it, right? You wouldn't say that to Leonardo DiCaprio, that, oh, the Wolf of Wall Street guy was not that attractive. I don't know, man. I don't think you can play him, No, right? Like you're like, oh, wow, amazing. The better looking, the better, right? Let's do this thing, And I know that Mindy Kaling went through it all her life too, that, oh, she's not attractive enough to play that friend, Like, it's so sad. It's either you're not attractive enough, or when you are, it's like, you're too attractive to play that character, because their minds have not expanded enough to grasp the idea that, okay, South Asian people, we admire them from afar, but can they be attractive? Like, no, I don't think they've fully grasped that idea. And it's kind of weird to even say this, but I wanted to share that. It's kind of a strange story, but yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the themes, I mean, it's definitely come through really strongly in this discussion. And, as Susan and I always do at the end of these episodes, is to capture the learning. And I think one of the big things that, I'm taking away, and that, allies need to take away certainly, is paint the full picture. Being different is not somebody's full storyline. So whether you're in a workplace, whether you're casting an actor, that person should be portrayed with a full life. And yes, they might be Korean, or they might be gay, or they might be in a wheelchair. That is one aspect of them, but paint the full picture. That is definitely a key takeaway.
Today, we have another awesome guest to chat with us about some subjects that are close to our heart, mental health and race included. So Rohini, set up our guest and let's get started.
Yes, so we're excited to invite Stacey Lee Kong. She is a writer, editor. Stacey and I go back many, many years to when we were very young in the journalism and PR fields, respectively. But also, most recently, Stacey is the author of one of my favorites and my first newsletter run by a media journalist. And Friday Things is just, it's a dose of joy, but it sort of feels like a serious conversation while having a fun conversation. So Stacey, maybe I'll turn it to you and you can tell us about the inspiration.
Yes, thank you, first of all, for the best, I think, intro I've ever gotten. A serious conversation disguised as a fun conversation is like my whole brand. It's 100% what I always want to have. So thank you. But that actually is kind of like, I know I was kind of laughing about it, but that it is so perfect because I was telling you before, I think of like the celebrity, pop culture, internet trend world as like it's like a clever trick. You think that that's what I'm talking about, but actually what I'm talking about is race or gender or, like the things that we face in our daily lives that are intersectional because, like my race is not divorced from my gender, the way people see me, whether people hire me, what they think of me. And I want to make that conversation more accessible by being like, hey, Kim Kardashian. We all know Kim Kardashian. Kim Kardashian is a nice example of whatever thing that I'm annoyed about that week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's it is. I mean, sometimes, you have to bring people into the conversation in a place that they feel comfortable, especially if the conversation is going to be difficult, important, formative.
Exactly. And I feel like a lot of times, sometimes my favorite feedback to get is someone saying, oh, I never thought about it that way, because that's the whole goal. Like, I don't think that first of all, there are many, many things experiences that I don't have. And so I don't think about other things that way. And so if I can make a space where people can understand someone else's experiences a little bit better and have a little bit of fun doing it, and maybe we can laugh while we're doing it, because, a lot of what we experience, especially as racialized women, can be quite heavy. And so if we can do that in a way that like punches up a little bit at the incredibly wealthy celebrities who, like they can take it, then I think that's useful for the rest of us to like learn in that way.
Oh, I so agree. I think if my whole sort of DNA of my work is rooted in some type of writing, and as writers we know that metaphors are the best way to get a concept out of like philosophical levels into practice. And then when you put those metaphors into like pop culture or give it some humor, like we need that. It's been now more than ever, I'd say, quote unquote, in these uncertain times, I think people needed to be broken. Maybe, I know this precedes that, but I think it makes extra sense. Like when you're like, let's have this serious conversation, but like, let's look at how ridiculous your perspective is based in this example.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the examples that we were chatting about, and I love your input, is, the move that Better Up made earlier this week, where Prince Harry is now the Chief Impact Officer. I mean, there's a C-suite title we haven't really heard before. But what's this going to do, from the lens of mainstream news?
I think what is most fascinating is, with the caveat that this is a privileged, like literal member of the monarchy. So there's a lot of like wealth there and privilege there. But what I found most fascinating was this idea that his lived experience was actually really important for his work. And that's an idea that I think is still relatively new. And the fact that for many organizations, and maybe there are some organizations where lived experience is a little bit more interesting, but or I mean, yeah, maybe just a little bit more compelling for hiring managers. I don't know that education and like all of these other markers of privilege, professional experience, there aren't a lot of places where someone says, oh, we're going to hold those things up at the same level as we hold lived experience up. And that's why you'll see, I think, the same people get the same kinds of roles in general across industries, is because there is still a focus on education, which is a huge barrier for a lot of people. And there's all of these systemic reasons where, the person who gets to go to the best school is not necessarily the person who's best at that job, but that is how we understand fit. That's how we understand, like compatibility.
Yeah, I think you make such great points that, this move from better up, to my mind is, much as it's high profile and like we said, at the highest levels of privilege, it's a Silicon Valley, unicorn meets an out of work prince.
It's like a rom-com waiting to happen.
So I understand that seems a little bit outside the realms of reality to some, but I think what it will do is point out many of these things that, follow by example, because this is how it's been done. I think they've done a really good job of spotting a story this is a good match on many levels. And I think people are taking notice of it in the industry, and the rise of the chief impact officer will happen. I think only good things can come of it. So that's really, really good. That said, I also am a fan of, going back to the pop culture thing, I'm also a fan of brand Meghan and Harry. It's like they seem, they're consistent, aren't they?
Absolutely. And I think I'm going to take a moment to rant about the monarchy, because that's what I do. But they had the firm, quote unquote, the firm had this amazing opportunity to appear, at least, to modernize an institution that has faced vast amounts of criticism for literal decades. And here they had a gift-wrapped opportunity of a beautiful, professional, kind. I obviously like Meghan, but I'm also I don't actually know her. So unfortunately, sorry to update you, we're not actually friends.
This sucks,
but
which
really sucks. I'm sorry, but I'm even just thinking about her, her public image. I mean, so she comes across as this person who's accessible, but still inspirational and still kind of aspirational. She has this fairy tale. They just had a gift wrapped narrative that they chose to throw in the garbage. And to me, that is the biggest indicator that the monarchy is completely unsalvageable, is that they don't even have the skills or understanding of the landscape that we're in, the social and political landscape, to use an opportunity that was handed to them. Obviously, I'm from Trinidad, a colonized nation. There is no actual need for the monarchy. When I say that, when I'm thinking about salvageable, I actually mean purely from a public relations standpoint. It's a useless institution that it's just expensive PR. And obviously there's a value in PR, but that's going too far. So I want to make it clear, I don't think that they're useful in any real way, but they had an opportunity and they were so incompetent that they squandered it. And that's why Meghan and Harry went on Oprah. And that's why I think on this side of the ocean, and probably in a lot of Commonwealth nations that are majority racialized, you're going to see a lot more people siding with team and kind of brand Meghan and Harry over brand dusted monarchy.
I wanted to actually switch to another Meghan, also a fumble, but again, with the lens of, a deep and very timely issue right now, which is around the anti-Asian hate. And the fumble that Meghan McCain made with her statement around representation. So I'd love your take on it, Stacey.
Okay. To admit my biases, I think Meghan McCain is incredibly irritating. And every time she opens her mouth, I usually want to scream. So I'm not surprised that her most recent statement has been annoying. But I think what is really important context. So if you kind of haven't heard it, she spoke on The View about how she's really concerned about this idea, this false equivalency between competence and diversity. And so this idea that she said, there hasn't been there's only been one Asian host of The View in 25 years. What does that mean? Does that mean that one of us should leave to make room? And I mean, my very facile take is yes, in fact, one of you should leave. I think it should be Meghan. you'll be unsurprised to hear. But kind of going to what we are talking about in a larger scale way, like you made this really good point, Rohini, about the two parts to inclusion and equity, where you have to like support, if we're thinking about the two Megans. So like for Meghan Markle, you have to support them, set them up to succeed, give them the training that they need, like when you're thinking about racialized candidates or any other, I would argue, like I think we don't talk enough about ability. We don't talk enough about like other types of intersections. So when you have candidates that are deviating from like the biggest air quotes ever, the norm, you need to set them up to succeed. So that's Meghan Markle. Meghan McCain is emblematic of this other side of the equation that you talked about, which is you also need to create spaces for people to succeed in. And if you continue hiring people who, and actually to go a little bit on a tangent, it's also a similar thing with Sharon Osbourne, right? We have these two, white ladies who are known for and kind of celebrated for sharing their controversial opinions, but often that controversy is racist. So the other thing about Meghan McCain is that she came under fire. John Oliver a few days ago reminded the internet with its kind of short memory that Meghan McCain was right there with then President Trump when he was calling COVID-19 the China virus. She said she didn't care what it was called, that it was accurate because it was first identified in Wuhan. In fact, I think she said it came from Wuhan, which is like a good indicator of how little Meghan knows, because we don't actually know exactly, there's so much that we don't know. The first place it was identified was in Wuhan. So, and I don't think there's a scientist who would be like, yes, and let me tell you exactly where it came from.
Right.
There's still a lot of, right? Like there's all of this lack of specificity. And Meghan McCain does this like very, I think, common thing among conservatives where you pick and choose your information to craft a narrative. And the narrative is for her now that, oh, well, Asian lives matter, but they didn't matter when she was perpetuating a racist idea a few years ago. So that's the like wider context of why I think her current statements around diversity and around hiring are so interesting, is because they feel so obviously self-serving. And like to link to someone like Sharon Osbourne, who also I think networks think of as this, like draw for people, and they're representative of a swath of the population. But I don't know, I just find it kind of offensive that these people are being able to take up this space, feel entitled to this space, and in fact, can make these statements that are so self-serving and with any lack of like self-reflection.
Today, we're talking about something quite close to home for us. Canada is often seen on the international scene as this country that's got its diversity story together. Living in Toronto, I can tell you that you're probably going to see people from all over the world here. And we tend to take that for granted, but that doesn't come without a bunch of mistakes along the way. And today we have a guest with us who's going to speak to some of that with us. Rohini, do you want to set up our guest?
Yes. So Mohit Rajhans is a media consultant with a couple of decades of experience in Canada. He is the author of Rethinking Your Content and also the co-founder of Think Start Inc. I met Mohit, our paths crossed many years ago when I was first early days in the PR industry when he used to work at Breakfast Television, and from my perspective was somebody who had made it. And so Mohit, welcome to the show, and break that down for us. What was that? What did that feel like in the early days?
So back in the day, as they say, I was one of the very first South Asians working in many mainstream media organizations. And if I wasn't one of the first, I was definitely one of the few. And so my journey really did start in the early 90s in the later 90s when I realized that not many South Asians were in media. And I couldn't understand 100% if that was a financial thing or if that was an industry thing. And so two things happened at once. My curiosity flourished and the original idea of diversity in media became something that was fairly significant as an initiative. So Canada, as you said earlier in the introductions, Canada wanted to be the leader in showing diversity content. And I happened to be a part of the people that put up his hand and said, I think I'm diverse enough to do that. So it wasn't that easy, obviously, because many people referred to the idea of introducing diversity content as tokenism, and people referred to it as a lost leader when it came down to advertising as well. So I lived this duality. I started to work at Omni Television as an ethnic reporter, and I covered Bollywood. And I was a host for a Bollywood show for many years. And then I was also a producer at Breakfast Television. And when I wasn't a producer at Breakfast Television, then I was volunteering at the Directors Guild of Canada. When I wasn't doing that, then I was trying to find gigs with CBC. I was literally, for the first 10 years of my career, a media hustler.
Okay, Mohit, let's go back to, I mean, I think it's important to recognize, where you got your start in the industry, and talk to us a little bit about your, Bollywood red carpet reporting days.
Yeah, so I was very, very lucky. I swear to you that I was so super lucky, because I'm living in that duality. I really pushed through when Bollywood was first getting into mainstream here. I really pushed through the noise to say, hey, there's a market for this. And so doing that, I fought for it. I got on air to do it. And I ended up living out this sort of dream sequence of interviewing people that I'd seen as a child, but also I was super, super, super interested in, right? And I never realized how much I was interested in them until I started covering the industry. And so I became this, like, the same way people love comic book heroes, that's how Bollywood stars were to me. And so I could live this world without having to pretend to be, most fans are two fans, they're two big fans. And I was able to live this world where I could cover Bollywood. And it's been a part of my life for the entire media career I've had. People from TIFF all the way up to En route magazine I've covered recently, Bollywood stuff for. I have a cadence in a relationship with an industry that I'm extremely lucky to have. But I'll tell you one thing is that I don't necessarily think those opportunities are going to exist again. I just feel like the industry hit its peak in the North American market at a place where I could have these awesome interactions with I can't even, I would love to show a picture gallery one day to show how lucky I've been. So just to finish off on that path, I took about a decade out of that whole television journey, and I moved into digital about 5 years ago as a result. And I've been a consultant ever since. My goal really is to speak to as much of the younger generation as possible to make sure that we don't make the same mistakes that were made in the first round, especially when I was growing up in this business.
Yeah, so let's break that down a little bit.
Sure.
What are some of those mistakes, or what, some of those blind spots? I mean, I think it's important, certainly on this show, we like to focus on mistakes because they're starting points for learning. But what were some of the things that were done wrong that we can now learn from and build on?
Well, first of all, there was a direct facade with leadership. And so the leadership that existed in wanting to create front-facing diversity programming and content for the market was not actually, it was not consistent enough with, it wasn't reflective, and I mean, to that point, big media organizations couldn't risk the fact that if they build it, they will come. Right. So they had to build it and know that there was going to be a loss but the problem I saw for the most part was the picture was being painted in front as being like, we've got all these beautiful people in front. Look at our billboard. It looks like we've got all the ethnicities. But behind the scenes, the people that were writing, people that were producing, people that were leading management, they were still making the same mistakes. I could still hear newsrooms speaking in cadences that were horrible and questions that were being asked of me that could never, ever, pass today. And while I benefited from infrastructures being built around diversity, the walls that I had to break down in the process were crazy. If if I took a blueprint for the amount of work I did for free just to get a moment on air at that time, this is a different part of my career, obviously, I'm referring to, it would be considered exploitation. And if you look back at Canadian television, and you might not want to, but a lot of we had so many great people that I'm sure had to work so hard to try to get that one spot, that one sportscaster spot, that one whatever. But they took that whole burden of diversity on themselves. And then imagine, they had to be something to Indian people. They had to be something to sports people. They had to be something to industry people. They had to be something to everybody to fulfill that gap.
So, yeah, I mean, that's a lot of weight, right? When you have to be that one representative of several different kinds, not even going into the intersections. The main parts of it are sort of heavy. So what I wanted to ask you about a little bit more and maybe dive a bit deeper into is like, where's the positive change? Like what is 2.0 starting to look like? I mean, many more conversations are happening, much more awareness. I feel like mistakes are made and people go to school in public a lot now because it's not easy to stay off the interwebs if you've done something silly or even worse, you don't have to have done something majorly wrong. Even if you've just sort of said something and not backed it up with action, there's a lot of calling out and stuff. So maybe out of fear more than anything else, some change has come to be. But talk us through what you're seeing there.
Yeah, I think the positive actually is in the generation after us. I see, I'm going to be honest with you. I raised children who looked at the rebooting of the diversity conversation last year as in, what's your problem, right? They're in schoolyards with people that don't look a specific race, aren't named a specific thing, don't come from a specific country. And then they're coming home and they're watching the news and saying, oh, apparently America's on fire right now because there's issues. Apparently people can't get hired because, I used to joke with my name, I couldn't get a job, right? My full name is impossible to pronounce to a hiring manager. And imagine what they think about putting that person on air. I still go on air and people mispronounce my name. Can you imagine? No wonder nobody wants to book me. I'm just joking. Sorry, but what I'm saying to you is that I'm more optimistic about the groundwork that we're creating for the next generation, because I don't believe that there's going to be as much concern. I hope there's not as much concern with having to build the blocks and more so make sure this is your compliance. This is how it works. We're all here. And if we're not here, then what do we do to be here? And in fact, I feel like we built a little bit of resentment in the generation after us because we should have figured this out by now in all aspects. And the worst part about what we're talking about right now is that they all deserve their own separate conversation, from representation to leadership to how are your training manuals being written, right? How are you dealing with customer service bias? How are you dealing with the fact that you can't respond to a client in a certain way anymore? All of that stuff needs to be redone.
I think we actually need to seek feedback differently. So we're not moving up the organization, but we're actually seeking feedback laterally and from the generation after us. I mean, nobody's asking the 50-something C-suite person to roll out our TikTok strategy, right? We're looking at our kids, we're looking at our friends with teenagers to take cues on what's hot, what's trending, and we need to look at inclusion like that, because it's the next generation, the way we talk about digital natives is they're growing up in a world where having, same-sex parents, single parents, biracial, relationships are the norm. And taking a cue from that, I think is really important. So that it becomes to go back to your words so it becomes the foundation and not the facade.
If you like what you're hearing, don't forget to hit subscribe and please drop us a review. If you want to learn more about us or the ABCDEI podcast, visit abcdei.ca.